Welcome back to Chat Like a Native.
Glad to be here.
Imagine you've spent 5 years perfecting your English grammar. Just grinding away.
Right, doing all the textbook exercises.
Exactly. You walk up to a barista, politely ask for a coffee, and they glare at you like you just insulted their family.
Oh, that is the worst feeling.
It really is. What went wrong? Every single word you used was correct, but your melody was completely hostile.
Yeah, the delivery kills the interaction.
Today, you are going to unlock the secret to sounding totally natural, confident, and expressive in English.
Because knowing the right grammar is truly only half the battle.
We are exploring the music of English sentences, specifically how the rise and fall of your voice completely changes the underlying meaning of a question.
We'll unpack the crucial difference between yes or no questions and information questions.
And we're going to introduce you to a really powerful training technique called shadowing to fix a flat voice once and for all.
It's really a game changer.
It is. Keep this princhy, memorable phrase in your back pocket to guide you through this session. Yes goes high, way goes low, shadow the flow.
I love that.
I'll say that one more time. Yes goes high, way goes low, shadow the flow.
Super catchy.
Okay, let's unpack this. We just promised you that you could sound more natural. But to get there, we have to look at why perfectly constructed sentences still fail in the real world.
Right.
Because that barista scenario, it's agonizing for learners.
It is agonizing, and, it happens every single day. People spend thousands of hours memorizing these huge vocabulary lists.
Yeah, mastering complex sentence structures and all that.
Exactly. They know exactly how to form correct questions like, do you work here? Or are you ready?
The words are chosen perfectly.
But when they actually speak, the interaction feels incredibly tense, cold, or just strangely unclear.
I love thinking about this like playing a piano.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
Right. Imagine someone sitting down to play a beautiful, highly complex piece of music. They hit every single correct key in the exact correct sequence.
So, technically speaking, the grammar of the song is flawless.
Exactly flawless. But imagine they are hitting every single key with the exact same rigid robotic force. Plink, plink, plink.
Yeah, just totally flat.
Right. It's technically correct, but the emotion, the nuance, and the actual meaning of the music are entirely missing.
The music is what we call intonation. It's the literal rise and fall of your voice as you speak.
And it's not just extra flair.
Oh, no, not at all. In spoken English, intonation isn't just decoration. It is an active part of the message.
So the words and the music are doing two different jobs.
Precisely. Words carry the cold, hard facts, but intonation carries the instructions for how the listener should actually interpret those facts.
Which brings us to the psychology of this whole thing. Why does a native listener react so poorly when that melody is missing?
That's a great question.
Like, if my grammar is perfect, shouldn't they just understand me?
Well, humans don't process language purely as text. We process the melody first.
Really? Before the words?
Yeah, there is a deeply ingrained evolutionary reason for this. Long before early humans developed complex grammatical structures,
Right.
our ancestors had to determine if an approaching person was a friend or a threat entirely based on vocal pitch.
Oh, wow. So our brains are literally hardwired to scan the melody for danger before we even care what the actual words mean.
Exactly. The brain's threat detection center, the amygdala, processes pitch and tone to assess safety in milliseconds.
In milliseconds? That's incredibly fast.
It is. The cortex takes slightly longer to decode the actual vocabulary.
Okay, so what happens when a learner speaks with a flat voice?
When an English learner uses a flat, harsh, or downward intonation on a perfectly polite sentence, the native speaker's survival brain registers a mismatch.
A mismatch between the polite words and the aggressive tone.
Yes. Subconsciously, they don't think, oh, this person's English grammar is just a bit unnatural.
What do they feel?
They instantly feel this person is hostile, bored, or highly insecure.
That is a massive insight. The listener feels a social friction, not a grammatical error.
Exactly. And that explains why learners often panic when a conversation feels strange.
Yeah, they sense that weird tension. And their instinct is to throw more words at the problem.
Because they sense that friction, they start over-explaining. They add these clunky, awkward disclaimers.
Like, what do they say?
They might suddenly blurt out, I'm just asking politely, or sorry, I just want to know if, just to clarify their intent.
Which just makes the interaction infinitely more awkward.
And completely unnecessary. The vocabulary was never the issue to begin with.
Right.
Simply using a better intonation pattern resolves that underlying social friction significantly faster than any extra words ever could.
Fixing the melody fixes the relationship in the room. I love that.
Yeah, it really does.
So if the music is missing, how do we manipulate this melody when we're asking questions? We need to understand the basic chords of this language.
Well, the dynamic between a rising pattern and a falling pattern is the engine of spoken English.
Okay, so let's start with the rise.
For questions that can be answered with a simple yes or no, the voice typically moves upward near the end of the phrase.
So common everyday questions like, did you pick up the groceries?
Right.
Or does the store open at 1?
Notice how your pitch lifts at the end of those. That upward movement is performing a specific mechanical function in the conversation.
What's the function?
It helps the listener hear that the question is literally open. You are tossing the conversational ball into their court.
Okay, I see.
And you are leaving the door open because you expect a volley back, a simple confirmation or a rejection.
Let me try a side-by-side comparison for the listener to highlight this.
Yeah.
I will say the exact same words, first with a flat downward voice, and then with a rising voice.
Go for it. Let's see how it changes the dynamic.
First, flat. Are you ready? Pause. Ones. Oh, wow. That sounds incredibly demanding.
It does. It completely stops being a natural request for information.
It feels heavy.
When a yes or no question goes down, it starts sounding like a command, or worse, a judgment with an impatient opinion hiding right behind it.
And now, rising. Are you ready? The difference is night and day. The second one is an invitation.
Exactly. That upward lift is the social glue that keeps the interaction polite and open.
Okay, wait. I had to push back on this for a second.
Sure.
If I am learning English and I desperately want to sound friendly and polite to native speakers, shouldn't I just make every single question rise at the end?
I hear that a lot.
Doesn't going up make everything sound happier and softer?
That is a very understandable instinct, but it is actually a massive trap.
Really? Why?
Making all questions rise is one of the most common ways learners accidentally sabotage their own conversational authority.
How does it sabotage them?
Well, leaving the door open with a rising pitch works beautifully when you just need a yes or no. But if you need specific facts, like an address, a time, or a reason, leaving the pitch hanging makes you sound intensely uncertain.
You mean when we use information questions, the why question?
Right. Who, what, where, when, why, and how.
So what should we do with those?
In those instances, you aren't checking a binary fact. You are asking for real, new information. The tone needs to sound grounded and complete.
Oh, it needs to fall.
It needs to fall. Think about a question like, where do you run?
Where do you run? The voice comes down and anchors the sentence.
Now, try saying that exact same why question with the polite rising pitch you suggested earlier.
Okay. Where do you run?
See? Depending on the context, that upward inflection on a why question sounds like you are reacting with total disbelief.
Overlap.
Oh, I hear it. Overlap. It sounds like I just told you I run ultramarathons on the moon, and you are entirely shocked.
Yeah, I'm questioning your sanity.
Exactly. Or in a milder context, it sounds like you are constantly second-guessing your own right to ask the question.
Like I'm hesitant to take up space in the conversation. It drains all the confidence out of the room.
Falling intonation on an information question isn't rude, it is grounded. It claims the space.
That makes a lot of sense.
While real speech is incredibly flexible, falling intonation is your strong baseline for questions.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We've established the structural rules rise for yes or no, fall for information.
Yep, those are the basics.
But intonation is essentially the metadata of human interaction. It's the verbal equivalent of text emojis.
The metadata of the voice. I love that. Think about how a text message operates.
Okay.
You can send a message that just says, I'm on my way. Put a smiley face emoji next to it, and it means you are happily heading over.
Right.
Put an eye roll emoji next to it, and it means you are dragging yourself there against your will.
The text itself didn't change a single letter.
But the emotional payload completely flipped. Intonation does the exact same thing for your voice.
It tells the listener your emotional stake before they even have a chance to process your vocabulary.
Exactly.
And just like you wouldn't put an angry face next to happy birthday, you shouldn't put a falling flat pitch on a supportive question.
That's a great rule of thumb.
The exact same words have entirely different meanings based entirely on the voice shaker. Let's test this out.
Let's do it.
Take a very simple common phrase like, do you need some help?
If you approach someone struggling with a heavy box and use a gentle rise, it sounds warm and supportive.
Right, like, do you need some help?
But let's say you've been waiting for 20 minutes while someone slowly fumbles with a ticket machine and you drop the pitch hard and flat. Do you need some help?
Oh, man. Suddenly, I sound deeply impatient.
You do.
I am not actually offering help. I am aggressively demanding that they hurry up. The power dynamic shifts instantly.
Let's push this even further. The single word, really.
Oh, that's a good one.
It is the ultimate test of intonation as social meaning. Let's practice conveying totally different attitudes with just that one word, purely by changing the music.
Okay, I'm ready.
First, let's hear genuine high-pitched surprise.
Really. Lots of upward movement. Very bright.
Perfect. Now drop it down. Make it flat and incredibly annoyed.
Really. Short, dropping hard into the floor.
Spot on. Now shift it. What if you are highly skeptical, like you don't believe a word I'm saying?
Really. Dragging it out, dipping down and back up.
Nailed it. Finally, what if you are genuinely excited because I just told you I got a massive promotion?
Right.
It's the exact same word with the exact same spelling every single time, but the social reality of the room changes completely.
That is wild.
This is why viewing intonation as a rigid grammar rule fails. You have to practice it as a tool for managing relationships.
You have to ask yourself before you speak, right?
Yeah.
Like, do I want to sound warm right now?
Do I want to sound confident?
Yeah.
Curious? Annoyed? Your voice helps answer those questions for the listener immediately.
Okay, so understanding these concepts intellectually is fantastic. We know that yes goes high and what goes low.
Right?
We understand that the voice acts as an emotional emoji.
Mm-hmm.
But how does a listener actually train the physical muscles in their mouth and throat to execute these patterns in real time?
Yeah, that's the tricky part.
Because reading about pitch in a textbook doesn't rewire your speaking habits.
It definitely doesn't. That requires moving from theory to physical training.
And what does that look like?
The solution is a highly effective technique called shadowing.
Shadowing.
Yeah. Shadowing involves listening to a short piece of natural English and immediately repeating it, almost like a vocal echo.
So you copy the rhythm, the stress, and the voice movement.
Exactly.
Let me ask a clarifying question for the listener, because this is a huge pain point.
Okay, shoot.
Does the listener need to have a flawless, perfect, native-sounding accent for this shadowing technique to actually work?
A perfect accent is absolutely not required.
Oh, that's a relief.
The goal is to capture the broader shape of the melody, the rise and the fall. You are tracing the outline of the music, not stressing over the microscopic pronunciation of every single vowel and consonant.
What is the actual mechanism at play here? Why is echoing out loud and specifically recording yourself so much more effective than just listening intently to a native speaker?
It all comes down to the auditory feedback loop and how our own skulls actively deceive us.
Our skulls deceive us. That sounds terrifying.
I know, right? When we speak normally, we hear our own voice primarily through bone conduction.
Okay.
The sound waves travel directly through your jaw and your skull into your inner ear.
So we hear ourselves from the inside.
Yes. And this internal transmission amplifies lower frequencies and dramatically distorts our perception of our own pitch.
Wow.
We literally do not hear ourselves the way the outside world hears us.
This is why everyone absolutely hates the sound of their own voice on a recording.
Exactly. You might think you're making this massive, expressive, rising pitch movement, but your skull is feeding you false data.
That makes so much sense.
That is why a crucial, non-negotiable component of shadowing is recording yourself.
You have to record it.
When you listen to a playback, you hear your voice through air conduction. That is the exact acoustic reality of how a native speaker hears you.
It's the difference between looking in a distorted funhouse mirror versus looking at a crystal clear photograph.
Such a great analogy.
Recording yourself forces your brain to confront reality. It bridges the gap between what you thought you did and what actually came out of your mouth.
It's the only way to really know.
If someone only has 10 minutes a day to fix this, what does a practical shadowing routine actually look like?
Right, because we want it to be manageable.
I don't want to just turn on a 30-minute movie and try to talk over the whole thing.
No, you want to start much smaller than that. Grab 3 to 5 short questions from a podcast, a video, or an interview.
Like really short.
Tiny chunks like, are you coming? Or what do you mean? First, just listen to them.
Okay.
Understand the vocabulary, and then close your eyes and listen purely for the melody. Isolate the music from the meaning.
And then you echo it back out loud.
You echo it back 3 or 4 times, And the real secret here is to shadow the intention, not just the syllables.
Put yourself in the emotional state of the speaker.
Yes, once you feel you have the rhythm, you record yourself saying those exact phrases.
Step 4. Record.
Yeah.
Got it.
Then, step 5, play it back and objectively compare your air-conducted recording to the original source.
And what are we asking ourselves when we listen back?
Ask yourself, did my yes or no question actually rise? Did my information question actually fall?
To supercharge that 10-minute window, couldn't we pair opposite questions together?
Oh, definitely.
Doing a contrast drill seems like it would train the ear incredibly fast.
Contrast drills are fantastic for building rapid muscle memory. You take a yes or no question and pair it immediately with a what question.
Give me an example.
For example, you say aloud, do you work here? Pause once. Where do you work?
Let me try one. Are they coming? Pause once. When are they coming?
Perfect. Feeling that mechanical shift back to back, pushing the pitch up to leave the door open, then grounding it down to claim the space trains your throat and your brain to recognize the difference instantly.
It really highlights the contrast.
And to avoid sounding robotic, practice that exact same pair in different emotional states. Say them warmly, then say them as if you are completely exhausted.
What are the hidden traps here? As listeners start building this daily habit, what mistakes do they need to watch out for?
Well, we've touched on the big ones. Rising all the time, which drains your confidence, or falling all the time, which makes you sound hostile.
Right.
But another major trap is focusing exclusively on the very last sound of the sentence.
Like treating intonation as a switch you just flip at the very last millisecond.
Exactly. Intonation is not a switch. The entire sentence has a shape.
How does that work?
The rhythm and the stress of the words leading up to the end help create that overall slope. If you speak completely flat like a robot for 9 words and then jerk your pitch up drastically on the 10th word,
It sounds incredibly unnatural.
it really does.
It's about the flow of the whole phrase.
Yes. And finally, never practice your questions floating in isolation without any emotional context.
What do you mean by isolation?
A question floating in a void is fine for the first 30 seconds of basic training, but in real speech, meaning always comes from the situation.
Right, from the emotion and the relationship between the speakers.
Always shadow the emotion.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We've covered the hidden problem of flat delivery, the evolutionary reasons our brains react so strongly to tone, the fundamental rules of rising and falling, and the biological reality of bone conduction.
It's been a packed session.
It really has. And what it means is that sounding natural and fluent in English is not about memorizing another 1,000 complex vocabulary words.
No, it's about sending clear, alive signals through the music of the language.
When you master these basic melodies, your conversations become remarkably smoother because the listener's brain doesn't have to work so hard to interpret your intent.
Exactly.
You sound vastly more confident, even if you are still making the occasional grammar mistake. Because true confidence sounds like a tone of voice, not a perfect verb conjugation.
That is so true.
If your questions sound flat right now, or if people seem confused by your attitude when you speak, don't worry. It simply means your ear is still learning the tune.
Yep, it takes time.
Keep that mnemonic front and center in your mind. Yes goes high, we goes low, shadow the flow.
Such a good rule to live by.
Start small, isolate the music, shadow the intention, and record yourself. When you do that, your questions stop being just grammatically correct, and they start sounding truly alive.
It really is the difference between staring at sheet music and actually hearing the orchestra play.
To leave you today, we want to give you a final challenge, something provocative to explore on your own, to really test your new understanding of this musical landscape.
It's a very revealing exercise.
The next time you watch a movie or a television show in English, wait for a scene where 2 characters are having a conversation.
Right.
Then try closing your eyes. Completely ignore the words they are saying. Do not try to translate the vocabulary in your head.
Just listen to the raw melody of their questions.
Listen to the rise, the fall, the pauses, and the pitch. And ask yourself, what emotions, what power dynamics, and what attitudes can you clearly hear in the room, just from the rise and fall of their voices?
You might be absolutely amazed at how much of the story is being told without the words at all.
The invisible signals are everywhere once you start listening for them.
They really are.
Thanks for listening. We will catch you next time.